All right. So now we're coming up to the end, and this is going to be the synthesis to see how all of these things are converging with the third temple. I've talked about Zionism's roots in the beast and how the beast created Zionism. We're going to touch on that today. See my Zionism/dispensationalism playlist on my website or YouTube. See my documentary, Why the Jews Are Not God's Chosen People. And today we're going to make it very clear that all these things tie and they all converge with the beast. First, I want to review some very important World War II history that a lot of people need to become familiar with, especially if you're dispensationalist. When Theodor Herzl met the Pope, this is an article detailing when Herzl, the father of Zionism, met with the Pope. And you're going to learn a little bit more about that from a book called Perverting the Promised Land by Charles Wilcox. Now, this is an interesting... Let's see if I can zoom out. Yeah. Okay, there we go. Joseph O'Hare is the president emeritus of Fordham University and a man directly under Dolan. He is the Knight of Malta and has presided over CFR meetings as a Dolan's operative. He is the advisor to David Rockefeller, Knight of Malta, Henry Kissinger, Knight of Malta, and Mayor Michael Bloomberg of New York. He is thus the Jesuit who directly controls the city mayor. He is also the Jesuit who controls the Rockefeller-Kissinger apparatus, of which the CFR is a key part. O'Hare is a devoted Zionist who supports the State of Israel, which was created in 1948 by the United Nations, a creation of the Archbishop of New York's Council on Foreign Relations. It was Archbishop Francis Spellman of New York who solicited votes at the UN for Israel. Spellman played a key role in Israel's founding. Get this. The founder of Zionism was Theodor Herzl, who had frequent meetings with the Pope and had once planned to lead the Jewish people in a mass conversion to Roman Catholicism. Do you get the point now? The true designers, financiers, and promoters of Zionism are the Rothschilds, who Encyclopedia Judaica describes as guardians of the papal treasure. We will confirm this. That's right, the Rothschilds are the banking agents of the papacy. The State of Israel is just the revived Latin kingdom of Jerusalem, and it's under the Vatican's thumb. This is Jewish Encyclopedia under Rothschild. Let's see if I can... zoom in, and you just, scroll down, yada, yada, yada. Here we are. We find a nice little highlight here. It tells you all about the Rothschilds, and it says under the Union Generale, it is somewhat curious sequel to the attempt to set up a Catholic competitor to the Rothschilds that at present time the latter are the guardians of the papal treasure. Didn't I tell you that in 1798 the Rothschilds were established, same time that the mortal wound was given to the beast? The Jesuits took on the Rothschilds as their banking arm so that they could fund all of their illicit activity indirectly without any direct audience. Of course, the Jews are the scapegoats. You have to realize that. This is from a website called geopolitics.com. The Rothschilds are Jesuits. We're going to read just a few of these quotes from various books and things that are cited. If you're not an American, you will understand why your country is on its present course, as it too is controlled by the Jesuit general through its select Jesuits, Knights of Malta, Shriner Freemasons, the Knights of Columbus, and the Illuminati, Masonic, Kabbalistic, Labor, Zionist, Sabbatian, Frankist, named after the Black Popes baptized Jacob Frank, Jewish House of Rothschild. For the order controlled the infamous House of Rothschild since no later than the French Revolution and Napoleonic Wars, after which Jesuit-led crusade, the Rothschild family was surnamed the Guardians of the Vatican Treasury. That's from Vatican Assassins, 3rd edition. The Treaty of Paris, 1763, designated King George III Arch-Treasurer and Prince-Elector of the Holy Roman Empire. And according to the Encyclopedia Judaica, the Rothschilds bear the title Guardians of the Vatican Treasury. The Vatican Treasury, of course, holds the imperial wealth of Rome. Imperial wealth grows in proportion to his victories in war, as the Jesuit empowerment Regimini Militantis Ecclesia implies. The church at war is more necessary than the church at peace. According to H. Russell Robinson's Illustrated Armor of Imperial Rome, Caesarian soldiers protect themselves in battle with shields painted red. Since the soldiery is the state's most valuable resource, the councils of Trent admitted this in preferring the Jesuits to all other religious orders, it is easy to understand why the red shield was identified with the very life of the church. Hence the appropriateness of the name Rothschild, which in German means red shield. So all the people who think the Jews are the one controlling everything, you need to think a step beyond that and realize that the Bible points you to the head of the snake. The appointment of Rothschild gave the Black Papacy absolute financial privacy and secrecy. Who would ever search a family of Orthodox Jews for the key to wealth of the Roman Catholic Church? I believe this appointment explains why the House of Rothschild is famous for helping nations go to war. It is fascinating that as Meyer Rothschild's sons grew into the family business, the firm took on the title Meyer Amschel Rothschild und Sohn, which gives the notorious acronym MARS. Isn't Mars the Roman god of war, whose heavenly manifestations is the red planet, red shield, red planet, Mars, war, funding wars? You see the correlation? There is a powerful Kabbalah here, and there's hardly an acre of inhabitable earth that hasn't been affected by it in some way. Remember, these people are occultists. Everything they do, and as far as their names, their symbols, they're obsessed with these things because to them they have spiritual significance. One more. International finance and banking are not primarily Jewish. Many of the most powerful banking interests in the world are run by Gentiles. One of the most powerful forces in international banking is the Knights of Malta, a Roman Catholic military order controlled by the Jesuit Superior General. Sadly, even a certain segment of the alternative media helps to propagate the lie that the Jews run the international banking. Interestingly, one of the titles of the Rothschild banking dynasty is Guardians of the Vatican Treasury. That should tell you everything. The Jews as a people have been used for centuries as a scapegoat. Keep this in mind. By these international banksters and their secret societies, such as the Jesuit-controlled Knights of Malta. To label the Jews as running banking, Hollywood, etc., is to throw out the proverbial red herring designed to throw us off the scent of the real controllers. That's what it's all about, folks. But you know what? The Bible tells you everything. You don't need to know all these things about secret societies. You don't need to study hours and hours and get lost in all these threads, because the Bible tells you everything you need to know. But of course, if you are deceived by futurism, that's the point, is to discredit God's word so that you don't know who to watch. Now that you understand the relationship of the Jesuits to the Rothschilds, let's read about the Balfour Declaration. The Balfour Declaration was a public statement issued by the British government in 1917 during the First World War, announcing its support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. So shortly after Herzl met with the Pope and promised a conversion of the Jews to Catholicism, the plan was underway. The declaration was obtained in a letter dated yada 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 by so and so and so forth, and it's signed by who? Well, it's signed by Secretary Arthur Balfour to Lord Rothschild. Lord Rothschild. Because the Rothschilds are the ones who funded this entire operation. Now, wait a minute. Aren't the Rothschilds the bankers that guard the papal treasury? That should be something to think about, isn't it? Most people don't. They stop at the Rothschilds, but they don't realize who the Rothschilds belong to. The transfer agreement. The transfer agreement, the dramatic story of the pact between the Third Reich and Jewish Palestine, is a book written by author Edward Black documenting the transfer agreement, or Havara agreement in Hebrew, between Zionist organizations and Nazi Germany to transfer a number of Jews and their assets to Palestine. Shortly after Samuel Untermeyer's return to the U.S. from Germany in 1933, articles appeared on the front page of newspapers in London and New York declaring that Judea declares war on Germany. This resulted in an effective boycott of German goods in many countries, affecting German exports significantly. The agreement was partly inspired by this boycott, which appeared to threaten the Reich. Controversial as it may seem, in hindsight, it marked one of the few rescues of Jews and their assets in the years leading up to the H word, which didn't actually happen. But anyway, the books documents the agreements between Nazi Germany and the Organization of German Zionists in 1933 to salvage some German Jewish assets and the voluntary emigration of the German Jews to Palestine before the Third Reich implemented an expulsion and then extermination. The transfer agreement rescued some 60,000 German Jews. A sweeping worldwide economic boycott of Germany by Jews helped spur a deal between the Nazis and the Zionists. So, we now know that, what do we know so far? Let's recapitulate. The Rothschilds are connected to the Jews, or the Rothschilds are connected to the Jesuits. They're the papal bankers. Okay. The Rothschild started the state of Israel. They funded it through the Balfour Agreement. We have evidence of that. That the Zionists planned with the papacy to do this long before the two world wars in Europe were even fomented. That the transfer agreement documents the Zionists and the Nazis working together to get a bunch of Jews to Palestine and basically begin colonization. Well, let's read a little bit more. The Havara Agreement was an agreement between Nazi Germany and Zionist German Jews. 1933, the agreement was finalized after 3 months of talks by the Zionist Federation of Germany. It was a major factor in making possible the migration of 60,000 German Jews to Palestine between 1933 and 1939. So this was a major thing because they needed to create a fleshly, counterfeit state of Israel for their false prophecy. This is a Nazi medallion with a swastika and a star of David. A Nazi Travels to Palestine, 1934. A medal struck in the honor series of articles, A Nazi Travels to Palestine, which was published in the Nazi journal Der Angriff, The Attack. This is a memento of the cooperation that took place between the Nazi Party and the German Zionist Federation in their mutual goal of relocating German Jews to Palestine. Mutual goal. Germany, 1934. The recto of the medallion depicts a Star of David, a cult symbol, in the center, surrounded by the inscription, in German, A Nazi Travels to Palestine. The verse depicts a swastika in the center, also an occult symbol. And he writes about the attack, yada yada. In the beginning of the Nazi rule in Germany, the Zionist movement was inclined to cooperate with the line that the Nazi government adopted at the time, encouraging immigration of German Jews to Eretz in Israel. In the spring of 1933, the leaders of the German Zionist Association decided to contact elements within the Nazi Party who might support the Zionist cause. Kurt Tuchler, a German Jewish lawyer and judge and member of the managing committee of the German Zionist Federation, contacted Leopold von Mittelstein, a senior Nazi officer who was head of the Jewish department of the SD, Security Service of the SS and Nazi Party, and asked him to publish an article in the Nazi press about the Jewish settlements in Eretz. In 1933, the two men traveled to Eretz, Israel, with their wives and spent a month touring the country to enable von Mittelstein to get an impression of the booming Jewish industrial, agricultural, and settlement efforts in Palestine. Ina reported to Yad Vashem years later. Tucker wrote, the purpose of the visit was to create an important Nazi newspaper, an image that would promote the Zionist cause in Eretz, Israel. After their return to Germany, von Mittelstein published a series of 12 illustrated articles in the Nazi newspaper, which was the mouthpiece of Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister. To commemorate the articles, Goebbels struck this medallion of, where is it at? Let's see, here it is. Here's the occult star of Remphan. And you can see on the back the swastika. Isn't that something? The two kings at the same table, Daniel 11, which I've talked about as well. This is an interesting little treasure trove. Let's see if I can get it to work somehow. Here it is. Okay, can I zoom in? There we go. Hitler's grandfather was a Jew. This is from 1940. Can I see what it is? Yeah, 1940. April 28th, 1940. This is a newspaper. Hitler's grandfather was a Jew. Secret dossier now claims to be a reason for Nazi hate. No, more like a reason to go along with the plan of moving the Jews to the false state of Israel. So why was Hitler's grandfather a Jew? Well, because Hitler was related to the Rothschilds. Rothschild had a mistress who he had an illegitimate son with, and that was Hitler. Hitler was part Rothschild. Isn't that something? So, of course, he's part of the club, and the Rothschilds are the papal bankers. They funded the state of Israel. Hitler helped with the Havara Agreement. And, of course, if you type in Hitler and the Pope, there's so much on that. He's buddy-buddy with the Jesuits and the Cardinals, and He loved the Jesuit order. Look at him. He's shaking hands with all the Catholic authorities. He loved the whole Christian nationalist thing. Hitler was propped up to be the light side that opposed the big, bad, dark communists that got out of control to create this war and to also fund this new project of Zionism, which is very important to bring everything to a full circle with this third temple. Do you understand? All these things are converging with Israel and the third temple. But there were many threads that needed to be set. But nonetheless, Hitler was a Rothschild and tied into all these things. Now, United Nations partition plan for Palestine. The United States partition plan for Palestine was a proposal by the United Nations which had recommended a partition of the mandatory Palestine at the end of the British Mandate. On 29th November 1947, the UN General Assembly adopted the plan as a resolution. Yada, yada, yada seems kind of boring, but wait, we got to see what the votes were. Voting summary, 33 voted for, 13 voted against. Now, if you know anything about these numerology that they love to do with their numbers, 33 and 13 are the two sides of Freemasonry, the Scottish Rite and the York Rite, which you will see a picture of. Let's see. Oh, I already have two of these already open. Okay, two sides of Freemasonry. Let me see. Actually, I think I was supposed to highlight this, so I'll be right back. Okay, hope you enjoyed that little interlude. Those are kind of fun to spice in there every now and then. This book is called Two Faces of Freemasonry. I had a highlighted version of it, but I didn't load it. This is by John Daniel, and it's also, I believe, it's part of the Scarlet and the Beast series, which is a history of the war between English and French Freemasonry. Now, I don't agree with the angle that this guy has, because he basically interprets Mystery Babylon as the light side finally winning. And really, this is about two sides of Freemasonry, which, of course, there's some truth to it. I definitely agree with that. But the Bible's very clear that the woman riding the beast is the Catholic Church. And, of course, there is an element of secret societies in there, but nonetheless, the interpretation that he gives you leads you into the weeds. This is the point. When you focus on the Jews, the secret societies, the Templars, the this, the that, you're getting off track. Yes, all these things are true. But what does the Bible point you to? The Catholic system, the Pope, the coming Christian nationalist empire. That's what it points you to. You don't need to get lost in all this stuff. But anyway, I want to go through this because it's got some interesting things, just kind of pictures and quick commentary. Two phases of Freemasonry. Of course, they talk about the Scarlet, which is given English Freemasonry, and the Beast, which is French Masonry, or the atheistic kind of dark, the dark and the light, basically, which again, there's truth to this stuff. There are opposing sides, and it's all serving the one world agenda. Scarlet and the Beast, John Daniel gives overwhelming evidence of this war between English and French Freemasonry. And this is like a 600-page book, by the way, but we're not going to look through all the pages. We're just going to look through a few, because there's some interesting stuff. Here's the picture I want to show you. Here's the picture of the Masonic pyramid. On the right, you have, I believe this is Scottish and this is York. I forget. Let me read. All Masons in America enter the Blue Lodge, which contains 3 degrees, illustrated by the 3 steps at the base of the pyramid. Most Masons never progress beyond the blue degrees. Those who wish to delve deeper into the mysteries choose either the Scottish Rite, also called the Jewish Rite, which is interesting, of 30 degrees on the left side of the pyramid, or the York Rite, which is called the Christian Rite, dark or light, of the 10 degrees on the right. So you have 13 and 33, which is, again, remember the amount of votes that were passed with the particular resolution for Palestine to bring all the Jews to their own piece of land. York Rite is practiced only by the Americas, whereas the Scottish Rite is practiced worldwide. Both are Templar rites. Many Masons in America join both rites. The highest degree a Mason can earn is 32nd Scottish degree or 13 York Rite. Both are equal in prestige. 33rd degree cannot be earned. It is honorary, awarded by the ruling body of Universal Freemasonry, the Supreme Council. At any given time, approximately 5,000 33rd degree Masons are in the world, most of whom hold high positions in their governments. Of course, they document all this stuff. This is Another picture. All these things are pictures from Masonic propaganda. The Masons view good works as building their eternal mansion on high. In this drawing, the entered apprentice, fellow craftsman, and master mason clasp on a job well done. As they view their good works, notice the all-seeing eye of pagan religions atop the pyramid. Building the one world false light system together. Of course, you have the one seeing eye. All these things you probably have seen before. There's some other things I want to show you, though, with the Zionism specifically. The Great Seal of the United States, of course, you know, there's the whole six-pointed devil star with that. You have these magazines like National Geographic, Discover, all-seeing eye. I mean, it's just so in your face. These people are occultists. This is the United Nations meditation room. It's got the black cube, and it's just this non-denominational, weird occult room. This is Freemasonry's olive branch on the earth, overseen by the all-seeing eye of Providence, from Mackey's NC. Kind of reminds you of the French Revolution, Rights of Man and Every Citizen, where they had the all-seeing eye over everything else. United Nations olive branch of peace on earth. Involvement in the United Nations for the express purpose of bridging the peace on earth through representative government democracy. Yeah, it's just one world order, folks. The UN is not the enemy, okay? It's these false light Jesuits and Catholics who are controlling the world through the papacy, through their various Catholic orders, but really it's the Catholic Church that you're going to end up pledging your allegiance to, because the Catholic Church will obey. What is the end with all this? As we continue scrolling, the end is the mark of the beast. And of course, I talk about this in my timeline to the end. I talk about this in my Sabbath series. So you need to get very familiar with what the end is, because the mark of the beast is coming. That is how you will pay your homage to this system. Knights of Columbus, International Order of Alhambra, all these things are competing secret orders to the Skull and Bones, the Shriners, all these occult people. They're documented so well. This is Feast of the Paschal Lamb. This is a ritual that they took a photograph. Look at these people. Members in 18th degree Scottish Rite, observed every year Maundy Thursday. The 13 Masons wearing black robes and seated at a cross-shaped table represent participants at the Last Supper. The ceremony combining Jewish Passover and Christian observance lasts 1.5 hours, including music, prayer, recitations. It ends with candles being put out by one. It's just so weird. This is a cartoon characterizing the war between the Pope and the Freemasons. So, of course, there's always these conflicts between the many orders, but they're going to be subsumed under the beast because, again, the devil has given the power to the beast. Here's the Shriner's Oath. Remember, we talked about that, your eyes being gouged out. Another place that documents it. You have 3 places now. You had that forum. You had that, I forget the name of the book, but the guy who basically used to be a Freemason documented his own experience. And you have this book that documents it. So that's 3 witnesses. These are all these Grand Masters. Here's one that is Masonry a Jewish institution? Ark of the Covenant worship. Revelation 2:9 identifies the persecutors of the church. Christ says, I know the blasphemy of them which are Jews and are not, but of the synagogue of Satan. Fear none of them that thou shalt suffer. So there's this weird association with like quasi-Jewish things like the Ark of the Covenant. They have their own like kind of high priestly thing. It's just very weird. Dedication of Solomon's temple reenacted. They have all these weird religions. It's a mishmash of various things. Here's another one. Beginning the first millennium, the Eleusinian mysteries of ancient Greece. Remember I talked about Pythagoras? From which Freemasonry was patterned, initiated their candidates to becoming a Jew. The scenes and characters of the mysterious drama as found in the Eleusinian orgies of Greece are the following. So these are all from old, mystery religions. The Eleusinian mysteries exerted a powerful influence on the secret societies of the Middle Ages, such as the Rosicrucians and the Knights Templar orders, from which come modern Freemasonry. Freemasonry makes use of the Eleusinian mysteries, specifically the initiation ceremony of the 30-degree or third-degree Mason, maybe. You've got relations to Satanism, it's all one big club, and you and I are not part of it, thank God. But there is something I want to show you as we go through all of this satanic nonsense. Look at this. Welcome Church of Christ, Sunday 10 a.m., 6 p.m. They got a pentagram and a Freemason symbol. That should tell you everything. course, here's the point within the circle we talked about with Schofield. This is Washington, D.C., a curious piece of Masonic conspiracy puzzle in the founding of America is the actual street layout for our capital city, Washington, D.C. Actually, it's as much the audacity of the thing as the conspiratorial nature of it. You see, the city was laid out in the form of a key Masonic symbols, the square, the compass, and the rule, the pentagram. So if you've studied like the streets in Washington, D.C., it's all very carefully choreographed. You got the 8 octagon, which is a Templar symbol. You got the jewel of the 33rd degree, which, by the way, all the police orders have, Ordo ab Cao. They have this star, and that's like the police badge. And, when they say, are you Antifa or are you the blue line? Well, it's just one dark versus light, man. The light, they're all fraternal order of police. It's all just secret societies. I'm not saying the average policeman is a secret society member, but I am saying that it's a dialectic with the whole Antifa and fraternal. Here we go. Now we're starting to get good. The 6-pointed star represents the balance of good and evil. Likewise, the Chinese yin and yang and the right and the left Hindu swastika. These are old pagan symbols, folks. The Nazis were totally into the occult. So, of course, they would be fine striking a coin with the, occult Star of David. It's not really Star of David. It's Star of Remphan. And the swastika all in the same code. Now, here's the headline from that. Here it is. Sunday, November 30th, 1947. Partition approved by more than 2/3. 33-13. They tell you, whenever you see these little numerological markers, you know it's a Freemason thing. This is what I want to get to. 2 Masonic brothers, one Gentile, one Jewish. Read the part each played in the Masonic conspiracy. This is Truman and Chaim Weizmann. One of them is from, they each choose their path, the dark or light, but hey, at the top we both meet in Satan's arms. And Truman is holding a Torah. Notice the occult symbolism. Gentile Freemasonry claims to be Jewish. In the book of Revelation, where the Apostle John is writing the 7 churches, we read Christ's words in chapter 2, verse 9, about the synagogue of Satan. So Truman, remember Truman was what? A Shriner. Henry Truman was a Shriner. So he was a 33rd degree Freemason, very selective group of people in the Shriners. But here he is, even though he swore an oath to Allah, he is with Chaim Weizmann, a Jew, and getting a Torah and smiling and all about all that stuff. And of course, he was part of that whole Zionist creation of the state of Israel. 6-pointed star is a symbol of Zionism. So of course, there's a lot to be said on that, and I've documented it. Here's another one. The caption on the ribbon below reads, "The Grand Conclave of Masonic Knights Templar in England and Wales." So this is a Templar, crest. Notice the interwoven 6-pointed star of the Priory of Sion. Now, I don't know about the Priory of Sion. That's something I'll talk about in another episode. But either way, this is a Templar crest. And look at the 6-pointed star. So that's interesting. You, of course, got the 6-pointed star and a lot of Masonic symbolism. The square and compass is a 6-pointed star. So, these are basic thing. You got the communist thing, which is an upside down G. And of course, the Freemasons are a right side up G, which represents gnosis, right? So having that false light. And of course, the upside down G is the inversion, which is atheism. So dark or light, pick your flavor. Square and compass are also sex force symbols, which represents both male and female. So this stuff is just old. Look at this Hindu. Remember the Kundalini spirit? Where does it come from? All this is coming. It's the same spirit, folks. Mystery Babylon, Kundalini, Tantric, whatever, sex magic. This is all just the same world religion. They have a King James Bible with a, Masonic thing on it. Front cover of Freemasonry's New Age magazine, April 1985, with the Rosicrucian symbol. It's all just one religion, folks. Front cover of Freemasonry's Scottish Rite Journal, March 1991, with our good old friend Norman Vincent Peale, 33 degree Freemason, founder of positivity and thinking and everything else. Helena Blavatsky. Blavatsky did more than publish her revolutionary ideals, she lived them. In 1866, she joined 33rd degree Grand Orient Freemason General Garibaldi and battled during the Italian Revolution of at Viterbo, and then at Mentana, where she was seriously wounded and left on the field as dead. In 1875, founded the Theosophical Society, joined the Egyptian Rite of English Masonry in 1877, and settled in London in 1887. In London, she published her theosophical magazine Lucifer the Lightbringer, as well as Secret Doctrine and Isis Unveiled. A follower of Blavatsky was Alice Bailey, a self-proclaimed witch whose husband was a Freemason. Alice Bailey founded Lucifer Publishing Company. To disguise its Luciferian connection in America, the name was changed to Lucis Trust. Lucis is Latin for Lucifer, and so on. And we've talked about even like the Lucis Trust online. I've looked at that, how they're in bed with the UN, and it's all one big club, folks. The illusion of duality. Dark and light, they all converge in Satan's pot. So, what is the conclusion of all this nonsense? Well, there is a direct link between the Jesuits and the Rothschilds. There are many links between Hitler and the Jesuits. The Rothschilds helped to fund creation of the Zionist state of Israel. Hitler helped to seed that state by transferring tens of thousands of Jews. Hitler was part Rothschild and part Jewish. And Zionist and Nazi parties worked together to accomplish this thing. Zionism is linked to Freemasonry and the occult. So is Hitler and the Nazis. So are the Rothschilds. Are you starting to see a pattern? The creation of the state of Israel was a coordinated thing by secret societies and ultimately the beast to accomplish its purposes. So all I'm going to say is that World War II history is not what you've been told. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, then you should learn more a little bit about World War II history, because a lot of people have been deceived by that and what the purpose of World War II was, which was really to restructure politically the countries and create a state of Israel that would usher in this Zionist reality, which would fuse Christian nationalism, dispensationalism, charismatic movement, all these things into one reality. That was the political thread that was needed to join the other threads that I reported to you so far. The point is this: the Vatican had a direct interest in creating the state of Israel so that it could solidify dispensationalism. The state of Israel was pumped with, probably, my conservative estimate is around $400 billion since 1950, between the US and Germany and everybody else. Probably much more, who knows. Zionism at its core is atheistic because most of the founders were atheist Jews. Now, who knows, maybe, they're occult secret society members as well, but a lot of the prime ministers of Israel, the first couple prime ministers, were atheists. The state of Israel today is 30% atheist. They're very liberal. They're now being exposed. So what does all that say? Well, this is a controlled situation. People are waking up to the monster of Zionism and all of the evils that it's done, and, the Jewish elite and so on. But this is a controlled revelation because the desired outcome is the conversion of the Jews. So you are being revealed, just like with the deep state, just like with everything else, that, hey, look at the big bad boogeyman of Zionism, because it's time for Zionism to be integrated and destroyed. But it served its purpose in creating what it needed to create, which was a state of Israel that would lead to a third temple, that would lead the Christian Zionists to fuse with the Christian nationalists and the NAR. All the things have been accomplished. And now as these things are merging into one great delusion, Zionism, okay, we need to get rid of Zionism now. Do you understand the point? That's why Christian Zionism is changing and why the Jews are being exposed, because their time is up. It's time for the next thing, which is the conversion. Like with every power, just like they did with Hitler, they bring them up, they destroy them when they're done with them, and they're on to the next thing. Ordo ab chaos, order out of chaos. And now it's time for Zionism to be integrated. So the old thing is going to be revealed to you. And everybody's waking up to the Zionist pill now. Oh my gosh, look at the Jews, they're everywhere. Well, yeah, people didn't talk about that for a very long time. Now suddenly it's out in the open? Really? I wonder why. Of course, if you have been with me through this whole presentation, then you realize why. But the question is how? How are they going to do this? How are they going to shift the Jews into a conversion? And the answer is the same as with Islam. Multiple attacks on multiple fronts. You have ecumenism, you have the cultural shift angle, and you have the coordination of the false prophecy, i.e. the Third Temple dialectic. This is going to bring about the Great Delusion. And let's look at a few articles. So enjoy this Fox while I be right back. Okay, so now let's take a look at all of these different angles, just like with Islam, that they are using to prep this whole situation. This is from 2011. Pope, Jews are not responsible for killing Jesus. I've talked about this before, but he says there's no basis in the scripture for the argument that the Jewish people were responsible for the death of Jesus Christ. That's the declaration made by Pope Benedict XVI in his forthcoming book, The Jesus of Nazareth, Part 2. The Vatican released excerpts of the book this week. Yada, yada, yada. They removed the charge from the Jews to basically, oh, you're not guilty of killing Jesus, which of course, I've said this many times, but that is one of the most antichrist things you could do because you have to be guilty in order to be saved. Jesus was the sin offering, and whoever was guilty had to kill the sin offering. Do you see why the man of sin is saying, oh, no, you're not guilty. Therefore, you can't be forgiven. They hate the Jews, folks. The Jews are just puppets to them. This is now from 2016. Pope Francis calls on Catholics and Jews to work together for peace. This is an ecumenical thing, but of course, you can see how these things work. He's meeting with the rabbis and yada, yada, yada. Here's another one. Remember the Muslims? Well, look at the Jews. Fort Myers resident and rabbi honored with papal knighthood. Cited for fostering understanding. This is from 2 years ago, 2022. So you have knighthood being given to the Muslims, to the Jews. Doesn't matter. You're all welcome into our system of honors, and we love you. Please join with us. Pope to European rabbis. Dialogue is the key to peace. I've talked about these articles before, but this one is interesting. We need Judaism to understand ourselves better. Referring specifically to Jewish-Christian dialogue, Pope Francis recalled that relations with Judaism are particularly important for Christians because they share Jewish roots. Of course, that's some part of it is true in the sense that Christianity is a fulfillment of the Old Testament, but Judaism is rabbinic Judaism, which is a rebellion to the Old Testament. We need Judaism to understand ourselves better, said the Pope. It is therefore important that Jewish-Christian dialogue should keep its theological dimensions alive while continuing to face social, cultural, and political questions, of course. Ecumenism and denying Christ at every point in time. Now, okay. Okay, sorry about that. This thing put me on a wild goose chase because once you scroll off of these YouTube shorts, it's pretty much impossible to find them again. So anyway, Francis Chan. No, it doesn't. I promise. It doesn't. Waiting for you to do something. God is waiting on you. Isn't it perfectly set up for the 1,000-year millennial reign? Of course it is, because it's all false and it's based off of lies, which I will prove to you. But Francis Chan is a Catholic operative, and we can demonstrate that through a few articles. Francis Chan and the Lord's Table. Here it is. Chan claims that we've replaced the Lord's Table with one guy in his pulpit. And he also decrees the mere memorialism and marginalization of the Lord's Supper to elevate the role of preaching. In other words, we should go back to an altar where we sacrifice Christ and we should not just think of it as a memorial that communion is, but really the full body and blood of Christ. Here's another one that he says, this is from 2020. This is the last couple of years. This guy has really come out to be very pro-Catholic. I didn't know that for the first 1,500 years of the church, everyone saw it as the literal body and blood of Christ. Everyone? No, not everyone. And it wasn't until 500 years ago that someone popularized the thought that it's just a symbol and nothing more. I.e., gosh, those pesky reformers. We can't really trust them. I didn't know that. I thought, wow, that's something to consider. Yeah, especially with the nice Jesuit rewards on the other side of that consideration. Now, this is an interesting, so I want to integrate a couple things. We're going to tie it all together, especially with this whole 1,000-year millennial reign, 6,000 years thing. But I want you to look at different things, right? So you have, again, Francis Chan, Catholic operative, teaching something that you will soon learn that is from the Kabbalah. But keep that just as a pin in your mind. Fulfillment Theology and the Future of Christian-Jewish Relations by Isaac C. Rottenberg from Religion Online. This is a quote from a man named Gershom Scholem, and it's about the Messianic idea. The Messianic idea, according to Gershom Scholem, is totally different in Judaism and in Christianity. Judaism in all its forms and manifestations has always maintained a concept of redemption as an event which takes place publicly, on the stage of history and within the community. In contrast, Christianity conceives of redemption as an event in the spiritual and unseen realm, right? Because you got to be born again. An event which is reflected in the soul and the private soul of each individual and which affects an inner transformation which need not correspond to anything outside. The guy is right. He's very correct. And what he tells you is that the Jews have lusted after signs, just like the New Testament tells you. They still do. And for them, redemption is a physical thing that happens on the world stage, a golden age of sorts. The Messianic age, something we should know about. In Abrahamic religions, the Messianic age is the future period of time on the earth in which the Messiah will reign and bring universal peace and brotherhood without any evil. Many believe that there will be such an age. Some refer to it as the consummate kingdom of God. Remember the consummate of the ages, the New Age term? Or the world to come. Jews believe that such a figure is yet to come, while Christians and Muslims believe that this figure is Jesus Christ. Judaism. According to Jewish tradition, the Messianic era will be one of global peace and harmony, an era free of strife and hardship, conducive to the furtherment of the knowledge of the Creator. The theme of the Messiah ushering in an era of global peace is encapsulated in two of the most famous scriptural passages from the book of Isaiah, Isaiah 2 and Isaiah 11. In the Mishnah Torah, Maimonides describes the Messianic era as the following. Quote, "And at the time there will be no hunger or war, no jealousy, no rivalry, for the good will be plentiful, and all delicacies available as dust. The entire occupation of the world will be only to know God. The people Israel will be of great wisdom. They will perceive the esoteric truths and comprehend their Creator's wisdom, as is the capacity of man. As it is written in Isaiah 11, for the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of God as the waters cover the sea." According to the Talmud and Midrash, the Kabbalistic work, the Zohar, the Messiah must arrive before the year 6000. Ding, 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 ding. Remember Francis Chan? From the time of creation. In Orthodox Jewish belief, the Hebrew calendar dates the time of creation, making this correspond to the year 2240 on the Gregorian calendar. The Midrash comments 6 eons for going in and coming out, for war and peace. The 7th eon is entirely Shabbat, and the rest for life everlasting. So this idea that Christians believe, and a lot of people have bought into it, that the history of the world is 6,000 years, and it matches the days of creation and the 7th. This is all nonsense. It's from the Kabbalah, and I can prove it to you, because there's a lot of fine discernment you need to understand why that's wrong, because it seems very seductive. Do you get the point? Oh my gosh, that's so cool. Like, we're aligning with the 6,000th year. The 7,000 year will be the 1,000 years of millennial peace and rest. It must be true. But what if all that stuff is wrong? And that can be proven. There is a Kabbalistic tradition that maintains that each of the 7 days of the week, which are based upon the 7 days of creation, correspond to the 7 millennia of creation. Note, Kabbalistic. The tradition teaches that the seventh day of the week, the Sabbath day of rest, corresponds to the seventh millennium. Do you think it would be I'm just going to pause here really quick. Do you think it would be in the interest of the devil, who authored the Kabbalah, and who probably had a plan all along to make a counterfeit eternity, probably counterfeit return of Christ, counterfeit world religion, to espouse this belief that there are periods of 1,000 years, and that the last period, which we're coming up on, is the period of the Messianic age? Do you think that the devil would have an interest in doing that? Of course, the answer is yes. The age of universal rest, the Messianic era, the seventh millennium perforce begins with the year 6000 and is the latest time the Messiah can come. The latest, so he can still come before that. Supporting and elaborating on this theme are numerous early and late Jewish scholars, including so on and so forth. In Chabad Hasidic Judaism, the event that marked a start of the building of the Messianic era was the destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans. In subsequent times of the exile, they last until today. According to Yehuda Leib Shapiro, dean of the Yeshiva Gedola Rabbinical College of Greater Miami, what was old had to be destroyed to give room to the construction of the new Messianic temple and to the future revelation of Hashem that will surpass anything which is known until now. This is the meaning of the festival of Tisha B'Av. So, you have all of these things. Now, of course, you have the Church of Latter-day Saints has their own millennial reign idea. Islam, let's read about Islam. The Quran states that Jesus was the Messiah and the prophet sent to the Jews. Muslims believe that he is alive in heaven and will return to earth to defeat the Masih al-Dajjal, which, remember, is the Jewish Messiah, or the anti-Messiah for the Muslims, comparable to the Christian Antichrist. It is disputed whether Isa's messianic age will be for 40 days or 40 years. A hadith in Abu Dawud says that there is no prophet between me and him, that is Jesus. He will descend into the earth. When you see him, recognize him a man of medium height, reddish hair, wearing 2 yellow garments. So basically, the hadith says that Jesus will return with the Mahdi and be part of, the judgment that happens at the end. So the Muslims expect a return of Christ. Interestingly enough, both Sunni and Shia Muslims agree the Mahdi will arrive first, and after him Jesus. Jesus will proclaim that the true leader of the world is the Mahdi. A war, literally a jihad, will be fought, the Dajjal against the Mahdi and Jesus. This war will mark the approach of the coming of the last day, after Jesus slays the Dajjal at the gate of Lud. Now, notice Jesus is the one who slays the Dajjal. He will bear witness and reveal that Islam is the true and final word from Allah to humanity, as so-and-so's translation reads. So, gosh, there's so much here, really. Just pin this, because we're going to, integrate it pretty soon. This is the Dajjal, and the Dajjal is the Arabic Antichrist, deceitful Messiah, otherwise referred to as the Dajjal, is an evil figure in Islamic eschatology who will pretend to be the promised Messiah and later claim to be God, appearing before the Day of Judgment according to the Islamic eschatological narrative. The word Dajjal is not mentioned in the Quran, but he is mentioned and described in the Hadith. Corresponding to the Antichrist in Christianity, which again, Christianity doesn't have the Antichrist. That's a Catholic invention. The Dajjal is said to emerge out in the east, although the specific location varies among the various sources. The Dajjal will imitate the miracles performed by Jesus, such as healing the sick and raising the dead, the latter done with the aid of demons. He will deceive many people, such as weavers, magicians, and the children of fornication. So he is the one that we need to watch for in the Middle East. Now, the Arabs believe that the Dajjal is the Jewish Messiah. This is a book called Emergence of the Dajjal, the Jewish King. Just take a note of it. This is a Reddit forum. Why will Jewish people side with the Dajjal? There's a conversation there about that. And this is, if you type in Dajjal Yanukah Rav Shlomo, which is that rabbi that's in Israel right now that everybody's frothing at the mouth for. He's doing miracles. He's just this young, charismatic guy. He's got the Torah, the Talmud, memorized everything. He's the main man. And people think he is the Dajjal. People say, oh, false Messiah this, false Messiah that. The Jews, the Orthodox Jews think he's the Messiah. The Muslims think he's the Dajjal. The dispensationalists believe he is the false prophet. And it's all intersecting with the third temple. So, what do you make of that? Well, a couple of things that we need to put together before we move onward. The Pope is doing ecumenical things with the Jews constantly. We know that the book of Revelation says that the kings of the earth are drunk with the fornication of the woman. And these are examples of it. Papal knighthood, little councils and meetings and declarations that the Jews didn't kill Jesus. All these things are ecumenical fornications. There's cultural superstars like Francis Chan, softening Christians up to the same ideas as Jews. Francis Chan, with his 6,000-year Kabbalistic perspective on the millennial kingdom, that's a Kabbalah thing, folks. The 6,000 years and the 7,000th, sequence of 1,000 years, that's a Kabbalah thing. The Kabbalah is decidedly Antichrist. The Bible doesn't talk to you about a 6,000-year period and then a 7,000, last 1,000-year period. So you need to understand that if the Kabbalah is saying that, that's an Antichrist spirit. Now, of course, Francis Chan, who is a quote-unquote Protestant, Jesuit operative, who we can prove through his associations to Catholicism and his warming up to the Eucharist and basically denying, Protestantism, he's just another cultural agent that is being used to soften the blow that is coming. And part of that is getting Christians used to this Kabbalistic teaching that, yes, look at God's plan. It's 6,000 years, and the 7,000 year is the year of rest, and we're coming to this great golden age where Satan's not ruling anymore, when really the Bible tells you at the this millennial thing that people think is happening is when Satan will rule, when Satan will finally be out in the open and ruling. Do you get the point? People think it's deliverance, when in fact it's damnation. Now, this is based on the Hebrew calendar. And here's the problem. The Hebrew calendar is not the real calendar. Okay? I have a whole 6-hour episode on the true calendar of God, which is going back to the Hebrews before Babylon. They were using the sun's position as a marker in the constellations, the 12 constellations in the sky. There's a whole fascinating study on that, but you need to realize that the Hebrew calendar is not true. It's not accurate in terms of the age of the earth, and it's not true because it intercalates. Also, it's based on the Masoretic text. And again, I have a planned expose on this in the near future. So if you're watching from the future, check it out. But the Masoretic text is corrupt. It's been corrupted by the Masoretes, which were Pharisees, and they're basically just scribes from the Pharisee tradition. And they created the Masoretic script, which is what people think Hebrew is, but it's not Hebrew. Original Hebrew was Paleo-Hebrew. There was pictograms designed to point to Christ because Yahweh's name, when written in Paleo-Hebrew, says, behold the hand, behold the nail. It points to Christ. Hebrew as a language died out in like 200 BC. The Masoretes recreated their own alphabet with their Kabbalah mysticism. Again, there's a whole thing on this I want to do in the near future, but Masoretic text is not Hebrew. It is a Pharisee invention. And while they also created their own little magical Hebrew with Kabbalistic principles, because for them, again, casting spells, doing gematria, all these things are Masoretic Hebrew Babylonian traditions. They're not original Paleo-Hebrew like the kind that Moses was speaking and writing in. Do you understand? The current Hebrew is a Kabbalistic occult Pharisee invention. You need to understand this. So people who are all about the KJV, you need to understand that the Masoretic text is corrupted. And again, I have a whole episode planned to expose this in the near future, but one thing I can show you today that proves that the Hebrew calendar is wrong is that there is 600 years of missing history in Genesis 11. What do I mean? Well, let's pull it up. So we have, this is Genesis 11, English Standard Version. And this is the Tower of Babel, and this is Shem's descendants. And it tells you this generations after Shem. So when Shem was 100 years old, he fathered so-and-so and, so-and-so. Then when he was 35 years old, look at the numbers here. 35 years old, he fathered the son. When he was 30 years old, he fathered Eber. When Eber was 34 years old, he fathered Peleg. When Peleg was 30 years old, he fathered Reu. So notice those verses. Now, if I go to the Septuagint and I look at the same exact verses, Genesis 11, when Arphaxad lived 135 years old, 130 years old, 130, 330, 134 years. What's the point? That they took away ages from each generation. There is approximately over 600 years, at least, of missing history that they took away in their translation of these various scriptures. Remember, the Septuagint was translated in 200 BC. Why? Because Hebrew was going out of style. Hebrew was dying as a language. True Hebrew. The Greeks had taken over. Everything was becoming Hellenized. So the Jews were translating it to Greek because people were speaking Greek and they didn't speak Hebrew anymore. So the Septuagint is the only copy of that's the closest to the original Hebrew understanding. And in the Septuagint, you have a vastly different lineage. Now, there's a very important significance of that, which is that in the Masoretic text, why did they erase this? Like, why? This seems so random. Why would they make this error? Well, there's a very good reason. Because according to Talmudic teaching, they believe that Shem was Melchizedek. You see, because if they can take away the ages from all those patriarchs, Shem is the only one that lived a long time. And what that results in, I don't have a graph for this, and I probably will when I do that episode, but what that results in is that ultimately Shem could have been in the time of Abraham, which a lot of Christians actually believe this. Like Answers in Genesis teaches this. And they're all about, literal creation and all this kind of stuff. But of course they deny geocentricity. They're all about the heliocentric model. So of course they give you some truth, but they're laden with error. And this is the problem, folks. There's just so much deception out there. Everybody's got a little bit of the truth. Answers in Genesis is all about the ball, and they also teach this Masoretic concept. Why is this important? The Talmudic Jews say that Jesus could not be the high priest because Shem passed down his priesthood or his whatever. Shem was Melchizedek, and he passed down the blessing from Noah to Abraham and so on, and all the way through Levi. So Jesus couldn't have been connected to Melchizedek in that priestly order because Melchizedek was Shem, and Shem already gave his priesthood to Abraham. Do you see the point? Do you see what their tradition does? And in order to justify that tradition and subtly discredit Christ, they erased 600 years of history. And because the Kabbalah says that the Messiah has to come in this 7,000th year, erasing that 600 years of history allows history to be today before the year 6000. But we're actually after the year 6000. The Hebrew calendar is 5,800 or something like that. I don't know what the exact year is, but it's less than 6,000. Well, the actual truth is that we're more than 6,000. We're in the year 6,500 or whatever. So do you see how that refutes their Kabbalistic position? And it returns Christ's priesthood to Melchizedek, which is a separate priesthood. So these two things were corruptions, and modern Bibles use the Masoretic text, and most Christians are deceived by these things. And of course, I'm going to give you another example here with this 2028 end. If you know who Gabriel Ansley Erb is, he's all about this 6,000 year period. And he believes Jesus is going to return 2028. And of course, I don't think that's correct at all. But it could be. A lot of the stuff he does is very legalistic. He's all about the Ten Commandments and very works-based gospel. He calls himself a prophet. He's written a book. So again, he's not affiliated with any denomination as far as I know, but he's all about the Kabbalistic view, which again pushes you towards what? The final thing, folks. The final great delusion that is coming upon the world of this, we're getting better. We're getting into the final thing here. Let's see, who changed the Sabbath to Sunday? This is, here we go. Just a few years later, the Roman Catholic Church also passed a startling decree in the Council of Laodicea declaring Christians shall not Judaize and shall be idle on Saturday, but shall work on that day. But the Lord's they shall especially honor, and as being Christians shall, if possible, do not do any work on that day. If, however, they are found Judaizing, keeping the seventh-day Sabbath, they shall be shut out from Christ. This is what I quoted to you earlier, and it's a little bit early. I was going to talk about something else, but anyway, we can pin that into your mind as well because it's equally important. Really quick point. The 6,000-year thing is a mythology. It's false. Again, see my True Calendar episode. We're way past the year 6,000. The Kabbalah Antichrist future golden age tradition is designed to usher you into this false Antichrist spirit reality. And in order to do that, they had to hide the truth of history and erase 600 years of history with the Masoretic text. That's why it's a corruption. Of course, a lot of Christians today believe that, and they find these fairy tales so enticing. Oh my, it must be true then. Rather than seeing that the 1,000 years in Revelation is a nondescript period of time, and it's talking about spiritual things. This is the Great Delusion. It's taking your eyes off of spiritual things to the lust of the eyes and the flesh and things that are obvious and enticing and, ooh, interesting. Many people are being deceived by this. Gabriel Ansley Erb, Francis Chan, false teachers, false prophets, they're abounding in this type of thing, and they all point you to the same thing. Are you getting it? They're all pointing you to the same thing. So now, how do all these things get resolved with the temple? This is the big reveal. The current state of Israel is primed to swing from dark to light. The old guard of Zionism is crumbling and being exposed. Christian Zionism has shifted into a very aggressive stance with the Jews to be from more passive to more active. We have to convert the Jews. They have to say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. That means they have to be converted in order for Jesus to show up. Even Francis Chan was saying that, or alluding to it at least. The charismatic movement is sweeping the world, uniting all of Christianity with false doctrines and false end times views and false counterfeit spiritual experiences. All Abrahamic religions believe in a future golden age. The New Age believers believe in a future golden age. The secular world believes things will get better because they buy into evolution and, libertarian views, humanism, that we can take control of our destiny and make things better. So everybody is buying into this future, and it's going to unite with the third temple will be a catalyst for it to all unite. The third temple is going to be rebuilt. Now, as of this video, I don't know, this is the 22nd of April. They were supposed to sacrifice the red heifers. I don't know if they've done it yet, but who knows what's going to happen. We'll see. But they're very intent on building this thing. And very obviously so that the Jewish Messiah, the Rav Yannicka Shlomo, will be introduced because that's part of their plan, is to there's conflict right now. They're going to sacrifice the heifers. They're going to bring the Messiah. He's going to build the temple. And what's very likely is that this is the guy who's going to proclaim himself to be God, who will fulfill the Muslim prophecies, who will fulfill the false dispensational prophecies, who will fulfill the Jewish prophecy as well of their Messiah, at least up until the point he calls himself God. That's probably going to spark a Muslim holy war, and the Christian Zionists will think the end times are fulfilling as a result. Remember, Jerusalem is surrounded by nations that's fulfilling all those old prophecies like Gog and Magog, which, by the way, has already been fulfilled. Ezekiel 38, I have a whole episode on that. But the Battle of Armageddon is probably what they're going to be staging, where the armies of, everybody's circling Jerusalem. And this is, what is it going to culminate in? What's the point? The point is, it's going to culminate in some kind of supernatural situation. Okay? It's going to culminate in either one of the three possibilities. And again, as prophecy unfolds, we will get a clearer view. But these are the three possibilities. Number one, Lucifer is going to appear as Jesus and account for his second coming and destroy this false Messiah. The Jews are going to convert. The Muslims will realize Jesus is the Mahdi and convert. Option 2, holograms, Jesus, Mary, whatever, will be used to create the same effect. Number 3 option would be this dialectic of war will lead to some sort of peace, which will force a charismatic revival in Israel so that Jesus can return. This is the post-millennial NAR route, especially. I'm leaning more towards number 3, but look, it could be any of these or some combination. Remember that the Bible prophecy becomes clear as we get closer to fulfillment, so we will have to watch this. We'll have to watch this, but now you know what to watch. The charismatic movement, the NAR, how they're going to leverage this third temple thing, this Yanaka guy, if he walks into it. You know it's all staged. It's all part of the Great Delusion, folks. The temple is the inversion of the truth. The Bible tells you that Jesus Christ is the temple, and we are part of that temple when we're born again. We're living stones. And they're inverting that with a physical temple that's drawing everybody's attention to this singularity in the Middle East. The Muslims, the Jews, the Christians, the New Agers, the secular people, everybody's being drawn to this particular reality. And this will be the catalyst for the Great Delusion, which is, again, coming by all power and marvel and signs and wonders of Satan to deceive people into worshiping the beast. People will lust after the physical, after false signs and wonders, after miracles, after false prophecies, and they will be deceived. Now, very important that you understand the role of the Jews. And this will be kind of the way we wrap this up. The Jews throughout history have been used as scapegoats for their dirty deeds, for politics, for proxies of various things. Manuel Lacunza writing as a Jew, the Rothschilds, there's always a proxy that they're using to hide themselves behind the Jews so the Jews take the hit. This is why everybody thinks, oh, it's all the Jews. Well, sort of, kind of. They're proxies. They were used as bankers to take attention off the Vatican. They were used to fulfill the false prophecy that through the state of Israel and the third temple, so they deceived the Christians. They were used to fulfill the false prophecy for Muslims through the Dajjal. They're used to justify wars in the Middle East to keep the petrodollar strong, so that the United States, which is the false prophet, can grow and facilitate all these false signs and wonders to come and worship the beast. They're used to unify evangelicals under Christian nationalism through first wave Zionism, like the conservatives we saw with Jerry Falwell, and second wave Zionism, which is what we're seeing now with the NAR, which is this charismatic dominionist infiltration of Christian Zionism. The Jews all had to play their part. Of course, they were playing their part in some sense directly. In some sense, they didn't choose to be doing these things, but here we are. They're also used as Judas goats through the Messianic movement to shepherd the atheist Jews from dark to light. Look, if you have Jews that are claiming all these things are great and having charismatic experiences, maybe this is the truth. And ultimately, this is what the angle is going to be played. That's another thing to watch, is the Messianic movement and its impact on a charismatic revival in Israel. Now, last but not least, and this is the one that I want to highlight, which drives it all home, which is that the Jews solve the dilemma of how they are going to persecute people with the mark of the beast. The Jews will be used to condemn Sabbath keepers once the Jews convert. Now, this is the point I want to focus on. In my timeline to the end and Sabbath number 8, I discussed the sequence of events relating to the mark of the beast. Now, if you don't know what that is, watch my Mark of the Beast episode, watch my Sabbath series, watch my timeline to the end. Understand that the mark of the beast is not some literal chip or jib-jab. It is the test of obedience, and that test will be the Sabbath, because the devil's mark is resting on Sunday and acknowledging him as the creator, the provider, the redeemer of this fleshly world system. It's all about the devil being worshipped. This is what it's headed to. The Jews have played their part to get all these things wrapped up, and once they're wrapped up, and once the Jews are finally converted, they will play their final role as the precedent to accuse and condemn the Bible-believing Christians that are the elect. Do you get how this works? I read that article to you that I read a little early, but anyway, it was the Judaizing one with the Laodicea, the Council of Laodicea, that pretty much after about 150 years after Constantine's Sunday legislation, they started passing like anti-Sabbath laws. So at first it was, it wasn't super hardcore, but then within 100, 150 years, you started to see threats of persecution. You better not rest on Saturday. You don't be Judaizing. Don't be a Jew. Don't be Judaizing. Don't be resting on Saturday. Otherwise, you're going to be shut out from Christ. And if people see you and they report you, you're going to be shut out from Christ. And if you're shut out from Christ, well, no societal benefits for you, and you might even be killed as a heretic. Do you see where I'm going with all of this? Do you see where all these threads are integrating into one beautifully evil masterpiece that the devil has put together? And of course, God has decreed this to happen, and it's going to happen. And it's truly diabolical. But this is how it's going to work. History repeats itself, folks, and this is the angle that I didn't realize in my timeline to the end episode, because I'm like, okay, well, they have to pass. The way it's going to work, again, it's going to be pro-rest laws at first, and then they have to pass anti-Sabbath laws. That's really what they want to get to. They want to persecute and kill the true believers, man. But it's an incremental process. You got everybody get converted to this charismatic thing, to the Great Delusion. Then you got to get everybody to accept Sunday. Then you got to turn the heat up and say, well, if you're resting on Saturday, that's a bad thing too. And then you got to start propaganda. So there's an incremental process that needs to happen. And of course, the missing link that I wasn't seeing was the Jews. The Jews, after they convert, they will be the precedent. Imagine again, go back to Andrew Tate. Imagine him as a fervent Christian nationalist now, all about the new thing, directing all of that spewing hatred, instead of at the liberals, at all of you Bible-believing Christians who claim that you are doing the true Sabbath and are telling people to abandon Sunday. You're just a bunch of weak pansies that need to be put in prison, or maybe worse, beheaded. Do you see how all of this comes together, and how the Jews will play their part to serve as a precedent to repeat history, as it was a long time ago? Do not Judaize. Don't be like the Jews. Look, they converted. And even the Jews who were all about the Sabbath, now they're accepting Sunday. So how can you possibly cling to Sunday? You're just a legalist. You are a cult. You're deceivers. You're teaching people to break the law by working on Sunday. Do you see all these things coming to a head? These are what await us, my friends, my brothers and sisters. This is what awaits us. And you have to be mentally prepared for it, because it's on the horizon. This is what it's going to come to. And of course, again, the Jews are going to be integral in creating the precedent for these things to come to pass. They're the ones who the beast was using to bring the entire world to itself. And afterward, they're the ones who are going to be, they're used to basically set a precedent to persecute the believers who are the elect and clinging to the testimony of Jesus and the commandments of God. When they pass the pro-rest laws, like Project 2025 and all the other things I've talked about, this is your warning that things will happen very quickly. During Constantine times, they didn't have the internet, they didn't have TikTok, they didn't have all these things, okay? 150 years took before they started passing all these persecutory laws and persecuting people and telling them not to Judaize. Well, we have not so much time. Once you see the pro-rest laws going into effect and this charismatic one world religion taking over, you have 3 to 5 years, maybe, I don't know, before they're going to start the propaganda against the Sabbath keepers. Because once everybody accepts it, then you are going to be the odd man out that looks like a cult, that looks like you're crazy, that looks like a legalist, that looks like you're in the way of progress. And because it's a law, you're the one that's advising people to break the law. So all of these things will be precedents that will be made and supported by the Jewish conversion. Imagine also this: 1.2 billion Muslims converting and having a mass awakening to the whole Catholic ideal, and them converting, becoming super fanatical. Now you're a Sabbath keeper. You'll not only be hated by Christian nationalists, you're going to be hated by fanatical Muslims that now are Christian, quote unquote Christian. Again, imagine Andrew Tate and all of his anger and all of these fanatical, Muslims that are Muslim apologists that suddenly they have an awakening, and that fundamentalist spirit that is in Islam, that is militant and that is cultivated by the beast from a very long time ago, that is now going to be pointed right at you as a Sabbath-keeping Christian. So the Muslims will also be used as weapons against the Sabbath keepers, just like the Christian nationalists and just like the Jews. Everybody has their place. The Jews are going to be used to set the precedent that, look, even the Jews converted, how can you not keep Saturday? You're fighting against Christ. The Muslims will be used with their fanaticism and their persecutory, history. And the Christian nationalists, same thing. They're going to be used for all their fanaticism and their peer pressure and their ecumenism. Remember, the Jews, even though they're antichrist currently, are the last obstacle to the persecution of Sabbath keepers. You got to see this relationship. Because as long as the Jews are around and they're keeping their Sabbath on Saturday, the Sabbath-keeping Christians have an excuse. Do you get the point? The Jews have to be converted. Once the Jews are converted and they accept Sunday, the final wall between Sabbath-keeping Christians and, counterfeit Christianity has been destroyed. You have no biblical basis if the Jews converted. And of course, you do have biblical basis, and that's why you have to understand your position so you can defend it if the time comes, which it will. But once the Jews are out of the way, the precedent for persecuting people will be very much out in the open. And of course, history is moving much faster. And once they take control and they pass these first pro-rest laws, you need to understand that things will move very fast. The beast doesn't have much time. And they know that. Jesus is returning within the next 10 years. I don't know when, but give or take 10 years. So this is the Great Delusion, folks, and it's almost here. Just when you thought we reached our climactic end, there's more. As is the case usually with these things, I always find something that is extremely important after I've produced it. And of course, because I'm a perfectionist and I like to have everything in there perfectly and nicely and neatly, of course, I have to make a change. So this is not really a change. This is actually a bonus, and it's an incredible find. So thank you to the person who brought this to my attention. It is a truly incredible find. I never even heard of this in any of the research that I've ever done on the French Revolution, on that whole time period of the 1800s, but it is so fascinating, and I want to read a little bit of this article to you, and we're going to talk about it because it is truly fascinating. Now, this is from the Napoleon series. It's an archive. It's by a man named Ben Wider, PhD, and it's titled Napoleon and the Jews. So fascinating. This is a nice little art of that golden shining, pyramid that you often see with the French Revolution. Napoleon was the first leader in Europe to grant liberty, equality, and fraternity to all religions. In this lithograph of the period, Napoleon is granting liberty to the Jews. Now, what is he actually granting them? You can see here there's a pyramid with light and shining. He's granting them the light. And you'll see exactly how that plays into all of this. It's truly profound. It is so cool. History is awesome, but this is not very known history at all. For religion, Napoleon ended the schism and restored the Catholic Church to France by the Concordat in 1801. He ensured freedom of religions and equality to the Protestant sects, and he declared France the homeland of the Jews. After it became obvious he could not establish their national home in Palestine. We're going to take a look at this. Scroll down here. How did Napoleon's involvement with the Jews come about? How did it come about, I wonder? Of course, you don't have to wonder too much if you've seen everything I've presented here. Napoleon Bonaparte had not met any Jews in his youth, and perhaps not even during his school years in France. His first contact with the organized Jewish community probably took place on the 9th of February, 1797, in Italy during the Italian campaign. When Napoleon and his army entered Ancona, the Jewish community was living in a small ghetto. Napoleon at the time remarked that certain people were walking around with yellow bonnets and yellow armbands with the Star of David on it. He asked one of his officers what the purpose of the yellow bonnet and armband was. The officer replied that these were Jews who had to be identified in order that they returned to the ghetto every morning. Napoleon immediately ordered that the armbands and the yellow bonnets be removed and replaced them with tricolor rosettes. So, get rid of their side, put our side on there. But he's bringing liberty to the Jews, right? He closed the ghettos and gave instructions that the Jews could live there wherever they wanted and they could practice their religion openly. The Jews of Ancona were overjoyed when they discovered that the first French soldiers who entered the ghetto were Jewish. Later, Napoleon also closed the Jewish ghetto in Rome. He liberated also the Jews of Venice, Verona, and Padua. The quote, liberator of Italy abolished the laws of the Inquisition, and the Jews felt free at last. So fascinating. If you understand who started the French Revolution, who was behind the Inquisition, and so on. It's the Jesuits, if you didn't know. Why did Napoleon do this? Did he have a motive? And yet here is another incident of interest. On the 12th June of 1798, when the French occupied Malta, i.e. the Knights of Malta, Napoleon learned that the Templar Knights did not allow the Jews to practice their religion in a synagogue. The Knights enslaved the Jewish prisoners and mercilessly used them or sold them. He immediately gave permission to the Jews to build a synagogue. Remember, the beast doesn't care about the Jews, folks. All the stuff that I'm reading to you. On this particular article, I highlighted some parts because some of them were very naive. They really paint Napoleon to be this liberating figure and he's just all about the Jews and he loves the Jews. It's not the case, but you'll understand as we continue. What could be Napoleon's motive? Now here is an amazing incident which is not generally known. When the French troops were in Palestine and besieging the city of Acre, Napoleon had already prepared a proclamation, making Palestine an independent Jewish state. Ding, 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 ding. You see what I see? He felt confident that he could occupy Acre, and the following days he would enter Jerusalem, and from Jerusalem he would issue his proclamation. He was unable to realize this project because of the intervention of the British, also important to understand. This proclamation was printed and dated the 20th of April, 1799, but his unsuccessful attempt to capture Acre prevented it from being issued. The Jews had to wait more than 150 years before their state was proclaimed. The proclamation, however, did bear fruit. It was a precursor to Zionism, heightening awareness of the cause of Jewish statehood. The ideas Napoleon expressed found the admiration of many who saw Napoleon's gestures as fulfillment of Bible prophecy, which foretells of the restoration of the Jews to their land. No, it does not. Whose prophecy foretells of that? It's the beast's. The idea drew many adherents, especially in England. 118 years later, the British would issue the Balfour Declaration, which called for a Jewish homeland, and ultimately 31 years later, in 1948, Israel would be recognized as a sovereign state by popular vote in the United Nations General Assembly, which, of course, we looked at all these things that are tied to the occult. And, ironically, Britain was the one who facilitated this move a couple decades later. Perhaps it can be said that Napoleon's premature announcement on the first day of the Passover in 1799 played an important role in the creation of the State of Israel. In the Paris Moniteur Universe on 3 Prairial of the year 7, it was announced, Bonaparte has published a proclamation in which he invites all the Jews of Asia and Africa to gather under his flag in order to reestablish the ancient Jerusalem. He has already given arms to a great number, and their battalions threaten Aleppo, who was the Muslim caliphate. On the 16th of August, 1800, Napoleon declared, quote, if I governed a nation of Jews, I should reestablish the Temple of Solomon. Do you understand? Hope you do. Messerschmitt Winneberg, who was the Austrian consul in Paris, in a letter to Count Standian, Austria's foreign minister, on September 1806, said, quote, all Jews look upon Napoleon as their Messiah. Napoleon was the only government leader that gave Jews equality when most of the other nations kept them in bondage. He also abolished the special tax on the Jews in Germany and gave them, for the very first time, civic and political equality. Pay attention to this. This is the material salvation that Satan offers to deceive people. When strong opposition in France manifested itself, Napoleon stood firm in the support of Jewish equality. Now, again, this article has a liberal leaning to it, so I'm picking out parts that are, a little more interesting. But anyway, keep all this in mind. It's truly profound how it comes together. The reconvening of the Sanhedrin. So, really quick context: Napoleon, at some point, reconvened a bunch of Jews in France and reconvened the Sanhedrin. And this led to certain other things. The reconvening of the Sanhedrin drew a historical comparison between Napoleon and ancient heroes, one of whom was Cyrus the Great. Gosh, history is so fascinating. I truly hope you will delight in today's little bonus. Cyrus, the king of Persia, was the initiator of Israel's first restoration, which is true. He made a proclamation to restore the temple, not Jerusalem, but the temple. Tsar Alexander of Russia protested violently against the liberation of the Jews and encouraged the Orthodox Church in Moscow to protest aggressively. He called Napoleon the Antichrist and the enemy of God because he liberated the Jews. Austria also protested. In Prussia, the Lutheran Church was extremely hostile towards Napoleon's decision, and reaction in Italy was also not favorable but not as aggressive. A most venomous attack on the Sanhedrin came from the Holy Synod of Moscow, which issued an open manifesto against the Sanhedrin. This proclamation, dated December 1806, states, quote, "In order to bring about a debasement of the church, he, Napoleon, has convened to Paris the Jewish synagogue, restored the dignity of the rabbis, and founded a new Sanhedrin." So they were really upset. Keep that in mind because it's going to be important. Napoleon's uncle, Cardinal Fesch, also got involved. He told Napoleon, quote, "Sire, you wish the end of the world to come with your laws to give the Jews equality like the Catholics? Do you not know that the Holy Scriptures predict that the end of the world will happen when the Jews will be recognized as a corporate nation?" Now, of course, what are we talking about here? This guy was quoting the Catholic Jesuit premillennial psyop, not the actual prophecies. So, very interesting. Of course, Napoleon knew what he was doing because he was under orders. 1811, thanks to Napoleon's efforts, Portugal allowed the Jews to complete freedom and permitted them to open their synagogues that were closed for 200 years. The Napoleonic period brought to the Jews of France, the Netherlands, Western Germany, and Italy the first intimations of modernity. It brought equality before the law and an end to oppressive taxation and enforced residential restrictions, and the opportunity to participate as free men in public and political life. In those parts of Spain to which French authority did not reach, the Inquisition continued to function. The sovereigns of the post-Napoleonic era had a weakness in learning nothing and forgetting nothing. After Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo, the Holy Alliance was convened at the Congress of Vienna, and also a very important historical event. At that time, the laws permitting equality, liberty, and fraternity were retracted and were not applied again until 1830, when the principles fixed by the French Revolution and the First Empire were reinstated. Prussia retracted the liberal laws in 1815 after the Battle of Waterloo. The worst setback was inflicted upon the Jews of the Papal States. It would almost seem as if Pius VII had taken revenge on the Jewish population of his territory for the humiliation he had suffered at the hand of Napoleon, i.e. at the hand of the Jesuits. He was not content with their confinement behind the walls of the re-elected ghetto, but he obliged the Jews to wear the yellow badge again. In Sardinia, the Jews were thrown back into ghettos and not allowed to build synagogues. Now, remember all of the ecumenical fornication that is going on today with Pope Francis, and just 150 years ago, how the popes felt about the Jews. They never cared about the Jews, folks. But the Jesuits had an agenda with the Jews. And if you remember from The Art of War, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but The Art of War is revealing to you their methods and how they do things, which is through duality, through secret clandestine operations, and so on. Moving on. Much later, some European nations assimilated the Jews between 1824 and 1867. Notably, Holland in 1830, Sweden in 1834, and Switzerland in 1838. It is remarkable that in England it was only 1858 after Lord Lionel Rothschild was elected 5 times. That's interesting. That he was permitted to take his seat in Parliament. It is also interesting to note that the laws that were passed in France in 1808 are still in existence even to this day. Bitter irony covers the historical fact that Napoleon's defeat stopped emancipation and plunged the Jewish youth into utter disillusionment and despair. The encounter of the Jewish people with Napoleon was a turning point of Jewish history. Yes, it was. For the first time, a modern statesman had envisaged the Jewish problem as a fundamental issue of international politics. Oh yes, for the first time, because there was no reason to see that before the Jesuits created their false prophecy. Napoleon did more than any other leader prior to his time to give security and religious freedom to the Jews and nations under his control. He had little in the way of political motivations for his policy. That's not a true statement. And there were no more than 40,000 Jews living in France at the time, which, by the way, if you just extrapolate that population just in Europe in 100 years to 6 million, more than 6 million, that's not possible. But anyway, prayer of the children of Israel. This is a prayer that the Jews wrote about basically Napoleon, that he should be protected, that God should be on his side, and they're basically seeing Napoleon as this Messiah figure. Now, another quick point of context, which is really important, is this man named Moses Hess, which I talk about in one of my Zionist episodes about their origins of Zionism and so on. But Moses Hess is really the guy before Theodor Herzl. And I won't read too much here, but Moses Hess was also very much in cahoots with Engels and Marx, and he was called the communist rabbi. So communism and Zionism kind of have, of course, the Jesuits, we know the Jesuits had their communist reductions in Paraguay long before the French Revolution. They were planning communism a long time ago, and they practiced it for 150 plus years in South America through the Spanish conquistadors. That's a whole nother can of worms. But as far as the Jews' involvement with communism, you had Moses Hess, who was an interesting figure, who was he was where Zionism and communism meet. Of course, Zionism is very communistic in some sense, and it's very atheistic, so it's still that same thread, the dark to light. It's the dark side of the dark to light. But Moses Hess is an interesting person, and he wrote this book called Rome and Jerusalem, which is also an interesting title. Hess's Rome and Jerusalem, the last national question, went unnoticed in his time, as most German Jews preferred cultural assimilation. His work did not stimulate political activity or discussion. When Theodor Herzl first read Rome and Jerusalem, he wrote that, quote, since Spinoza Jewry had no bigger thinker than the forgotten Moses Hess. So Moses Hess influenced Theodor Herzl, who, of course, promised the Pope a Roman Catholic conversion of the Jews if they just got their own territory. He said he might not have written Der Judenstaat, the Jewish state, if he had not known Rome and Jerusalem beforehand. Vladimir Jabotinsky honored Hess in the Jewish Legion in the World War as one of the people that made the Balfour Declaration possible, along with Herzl, Walter Rothschild, and Leon Pinsker. So, why is all of this so important? Well, it's extremely important. Let's review. The French Revolution was put on by the Jesuits, and I have a whole episode in my End Time series on that, episode 14, how that's documented. Remember that the Jesuits did their communist reductions in Paraguay and in all Southern America for 150 years. Once the conquistadors took over, the Jesuits were infiltrating that area and made like these communist dystopias with the Indians there. It's crazy. It's a whole crazy thing. But that's another can of worms. Nevertheless, they practiced communism a long time before the French Revolution. Napoleon, the whole Napoleon thing was a Jesuit operation. Napoleon was their first attempt. Understand? It was their first attempt with a fascist, nationalist, charismatic leader to start a Jewish state in Palestine. They failed at the time because at the time there was still a lot of conflicting powers. British Freemasonry, like that book Scarlet and the Beast, was very much in competition with English Freemasonry. So there was, secret societies where, remember, the Templars are the ones who ultimately influenced the creation of the Freemasons. I've documented that before. But the Templars, where's that come from? That comes from the Catholic Church. So there's always these orders. And remember, Napoleon saw the Templars in Malta and was in conflict with them. So it's just the many heads of the beast, fighting with each other. But nevertheless, the British stopped Napoleon from basically doing what he wanted to do, what he was told to do, really, which is proclaim a state of Palestine and move the Jews there, which is so fascinating because the British ended up, caving and helping with the Balfour Declaration like 100 years later or whatever. Nevertheless, Napoleon was defeated, right? So that didn't work. The plan didn't work. Okay, well, let's defeat Napoleon. Next, what's the next plan? Well, the next plan was communism and Zionism for Europe. And for the United States, you also had other things that needed to happen because the U.S. needed to get reined in by the Jesuits. Of course, we talked about some of these things with the USA, all the presidential assassinations, the fires in all the major cities, the Civil War, and how ultimately that led to bankruptcy of the United States. The Rothschilds, who were founded, remember, they were officiated in 1798. When the French Revolution started, the same year is when Rothschild was basically made the banker of the papacy for their illegitimate money schemes. Now, at the time, Rothschilds didn't control everything. That's why the whole British thing was a problem. And Napoleon and their efforts with this whole Palestine thing did not go through. So they had to, wiggle around a little more and do plan B. Well, plan B for the U.S. was, okay, we need to rein the U.S. in, make that a papal, power to be able to create this state of Israel. And we need to restructure Europe. And they did that through Zionism and communism. Now, just a couple decades later, literally after this whole Napoleon thing, you saw this dark and light happening. The Jews were liberated. The Jews were antagonized. The Jews were liberated. All these things were designed to prop up a desire for a Jewish homeland. Do you see the point? Dark and light manipulating the Jews to basically want their own thing because Napoleon revealed the material salvation that they could have had. He was their Messiah. They were comparing him to Cyrus. He was the one that was going to save the Jewish people, but it didn't work. And they dragged that carrot in front of the Jews for the last 250 years. So a couple decades later, you had Moses Hess, who was very influential in creating this nationalist identity through Zionism. And he also obviously influenced communism because he was in cahoots with Engels and Marx. Engels is listed as a Protestant, but we by now know he's a Jesuit operative. I also document in other places that communism was exported by the Jesuits to places like China. And, the Bolshevik Revolution was, of course, the Jews fomented that. And they were using the Jews to basically, now you see how the beast works? The Jews are always used one way or another. By Napoleon, they were used to basically come into this idea that they're going to have their own place and they're going to have their temple rebuilt and this all fleshly prophecy that they were using them to fulfill it from 250 years ago. That failed. So then, they played a little dark to light. The Jews were liberated. The Jews were banned, persecuted, so on and so forth. Then, of course, the Tsar of Russia, who was opposing Napoleon and basically frustrated the Jesuits' plans, well, we're going to take care of you, buddy. So they used the Jews to basically kill off the Tsar, foment the Bolshevik revolutions, punish Orthodox Russia for their disobedience, from splitting from the Mother Church and from, basically fighting against their plan. And the punishment was communism. Communism and the Holodomor killed like 10 million people. I don't even know how many. It's a massive amount of people. Of course, you have Mao's China, which also plays into the whole communist thing, and that was just millions and millions of people. You have Vietnam with communism. So communism was kind of the plan B, and that was needed to create this dark to light dialectic again, because remember, Hitler was also propped up to oppose communism. So now we have round two. Now we have, again, the charismatic nationalist fascist leader who, remember, through the Nazi Party, coordinated with the Zionists. He was a part Rothschild. He coordinated with the Zionists to the transfer agreement and get the Jews to Palestine. But the thing that was different is that within that 100 years from when the British stopped Napoleon to when the British signed the Balfour Agreement, the Rothschilds had taken over England. Do you get the point? There was a lot happening with England. I mean, England has been a hotbed for protesting the beast and being taken over by the beast. And, there'd been so much concerning England. But Rothschild, like they said, he was allowed to be in Parliament. The Rothschilds slowly took over the money system. They created the Bank of England. And by the time you had World War II, the Rothschilds were in control with all these various wars. And of course, you had the Rothschild control of the USA too, from the Act 18 of 1871. So by the time World War II happened and finished, because it was fomented, both world wars were fomented by the Jesuits, you had the Rothschilds squarely in position financially to manipulate things. That's why the British went along with it by the time 100 years later. Do you see the point? Now, fast forward to round 3 with Trump. Now, I talk about this in my big Trump expose, Trump, the light bearer of the New World Order, and I talk about his connection to Zionism, which is just so obvious. But at the time when I recorded that video, I didn't really put it together. I didn't put, what is his angle? Because obviously he's just dipping his toe in both pots. He's in the Christian nationalist pot, which is the fanatical Christian charismatics that we talked about in this whole presentation. But he's also in the Jewish Shabbat Hasidic, champion of the Noahide laws, Zionist type of thing. What's going on here? Because I knew ultimately the Jews had to be converted somehow. They have to reconcile this opposite. And now, having seen history, Napoleon, charismatic fascist leader. Hitler, charismatic fascist leader. Trump, charismatic fascist leader. Trump is a nationalist. There's a lot of similarities, actually, between Trump and Hitler and Napoleon, believe it or not. That may ruffle some people's feathers who are conservative, but you have to look at history, folks. Trump is literally, they have a coin with Trump's face and Cyrus on it. Why? Because he's the Messiah. He's the one that's going to bring them. Of course, I don't think they're going to declare Trump the Messiah. They may, who knows. But remember, the Jews lust after a physical redemption. And the Jesuits know that. The Jesuits know that. So they've used that against them by propping up these charismatic leaders that will lead them into the desired outcome to create a state of Israel, to create a temple, which will fulfill the false prophecy of the Jesuits, and it will bring the world under the beast with this whole Great Delusion. The Jews are being used, and they've been used since the dawn of time, since the Catholic Church took power. The Catholic Church does not care about the Jews. They are using them. They see that the Jews want a charismatic leader to bring them a fleshly salvation. They expect some Messiah to come. Well, yeah, so they play to that particular desire and prop up these people that are basically irresistible to the Jews. And the Jews go along. That furthers the Jesuits' plans to fulfill this false prophecy. And at the end, they just flip it on them. They use these charismatic leaders to manipulate the Jews to creating this outcome, and then they just flip. They've done this already for the last 250 years. Trump is going to basically be all about Israel up until it's time to convert the Jews. Do you get my point? He's going to be all about the Jews, and he's going to be all about building the third temple. He moved the embassy to Jerusalem. I mean, come on, he's playing right to all of their lusts for a fleshly, worldly king. And God has allowed them to be deceived because there's no difference between the Old Testament when they rejected God as king and they wanted Saul, who was the good-looking, tall, dark, and handsome king, to now, to Napoleon, to Hitler, and Trump, and so on. So what's the point? Well, the point is the Jesuits were far more busy on this whole State of Israel thing than I ever realized. They've been planning this in waves, and of course, we talked about this, that the snake moves in waves, but this is just fascinating that they were trying to do this with Napoleon, and they failed. because, of course, at the time, the geopolitical situations weren't cemented. The United States was still, kind of a rogue nation, wasn't under the control of the papacy. Britain wasn't really fully under control of the Rothschilds. Rothschild had just been propped up. He didn't infiltrate yet all the countries with all this whole international banking. And, which, again, remember, the Templars created international banking, but nonetheless, the Rothschilds hadn't taken over yet. And so it failed. Isn't that interesting? It failed. And as a result, they created, more dialectics. We need communism. Let's get the Jews to really lust after a nation. So they propped up Hess and Herzl, and communism was created to kind of create the dark to light situation that would justify moving the Jews to Palestine from Europe. Because, of course, if you have a dark communist world order, you need to prop up against it a light world order through Hitler. And then, that restructures Europe. And so, of course, there's then a reason to move the Jews out of Europe and so on and so forth. So it's really just profound how it all comes together. But this is the value of history. So anyway, I thought you would enjoy that. Now back to your regular scheduled programming and onto the epilogue.